Hello everyone, I'm your host Rachel Leroy and this is the YouTube channel Christian Emotional Recovery, and today we are going to do a talk called What Does the Trauma Bond Have to Do with Cognitive Dissonance? What does the trauma bond have to do with cognitive dissonance? Now, some of the YouTube videos you'll see my face, and in other ones I do voiceovers because, for me at least, making videos is really not easy. So this allows me to get more YouTube videos out to you that have more specialized topics and still be able to continue to make videos, but also have some with my face. So if you haven't, go ahead and hit the subscribe bell and you'll get notified for every YouTube video and podcast that comes out, because the podcast episodes are also on the YouTube channel. You can catch those at your favorite podcast platform or at YouTube, and you can check the YouTube channel out, which has videos that are mainly exclusive to the YouTube channel. There are some crossovers, but there are things on the YouTube channel mainly that you cannot find on the podcast episodes. So check those out and go back and look at the catalog of videos that I've done in the past, and you can get more information about trauma recovery as time goes by between YouTube and podcast videos. You can get more information about trauma recovery between podcast episodes. And also, if you haven't, please feel free to subscribe to the Facebook group, Christian Emotional Recovery, and also feel free to check out the newsletter. You can join that at rachelleroy.com. You can check that out at rachelleroy.com, and you can also sign up for a freebie at christianemotionalrecovery.com. And lastly, if you would like to support the podcast, there is no obligation, but it is greatly appreciated. And I'm thinking about getting making a way so if you'd like to donate by PayPal, you can do that more directly, but you can also make a one-time donation at ko-fi.com, that's ko-fi.com, or you can subscribe monthly and donate. I'll have people that'll make a year commitment or something like that, and they'll donate anywhere from $5 to $15 to $25 to $10 to $100 a month. So there are different degrees there, all the way from small amount to a large amount. You can cancel at any time, and there's no obligation. The YouTube channel and the podcast will always be free, even though I am working on some paid information as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into what does the trauma bond have to do with cognitive dissonance. Now, you may hear me shuffle a little bit and click my mouse a little bit. I apologize for that, but I am looking at several sources and several articles. So there's a lot of talk these days about trauma bonding and narcissistic abuse, and trauma bond is kind of like, if you've heard of Stockholm syndrome, but it's not quite as stark, I guess you could say. But Stockholm syndrome is, I don't know if maybe this was before your time, but in the 70s, there was this heiress named Patty Hearst, and she was abducted for, I honestly don't remember the history behind it, but she was with her abductors for a while, and she was brainwashed, and she actually formed a bond with them, and she actually temporarily had this issue with, hated her family, and a trauma bond is like a smaller amount of that. So it's like having a bond with your captors or your abusers. And so a trauma bond is not a healthy thing. It's basically when you have a bond with somebody who has high narcissistic traits, an abuser, or someone who is very toxic and unhealthy, and the relationship is toxic and unhealthy as well. So we'll talk about that today, so you can learn how to protect yourself, how to break a trauma bond, how to prevent trauma bonds, and so on. So today we're going to talk about that in terms of cognitive dissonance, and we'll talk about what cognitive dissonance is in just a second. But basically, knowing the connection between cognitive dissonance and a trauma bond will help you to use your own mind and your own instincts to navigate through unhealthy relationships, so you can tell the difference between toxic relationships that have trauma bonds and genuine and healthy relationships that are not trauma bonded but are healthy bonds. So as trauma survivors, forming bonds with other people can be difficult, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't find safe others, even if it's a few people. It could be a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a significant other. It could be with a therapist, even though there would be more of a boundary there, obviously, that's professional. But you can still form a trust and a bond with those people in an appropriate way, a coworker or whatever the case may be. It could be somebody at church. It could be there's any combination, even with an animal, but even though animals are great and during tough times they may be our only friend, we still need human interactions that are healthy. So we're going to talk about what is cognitive dissonance. You're probably wondering, what does that have to do with a trauma bond? And we will get into that. We'll talk about what trauma bonding is and what are its stages. We will talk about the connection between trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance, and we'll talk about how to free yourself from a trauma bond and move from clarity to confusion. So cognitive dissonance is basically that thing in your mind that tells you something's wrong, while at the same time you feel this strong connection or this strong attachment to another person. And in other videos and YouTubes and other podcasts, we've talked about attachment. So this very much has to do with attachment styles, and healthy versus unhealthy attachment. So let me just give you a quick overview of trauma bonding and how it connects to cognitive dissonance. So trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance are interconnected psychological concepts often observed in abusive or manipulative relationships. And understanding their connection can shed light on why individuals stay in harmful situations and struggle to break free. So let's look at both concepts in a relationship. Trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance, like I said, are psychological ideas that can help explain why people stay in bad relationships. So let's look at each. So trauma bonding. What is a trauma bond? It's good to know what that is and then to know what cognitive dissonance is before we talk about how those two connect to one another. So trauma bonding is when a victim becomes emotionally attached to their abuser. This often happens in an abusive relationship where the abuser switches between being nice and being cruel. So it's very sad. It's like a love bombing. There's a term for it, and I can't remember what it is, but it's basically a feast or famine, and it is a complete mind screw. It is a mind, the F word, but it's that. And you'll be like, well, maybe they're not so bad. And then you'll be like, the next day you'll be on the floor crying. And then 2 days later, you're feeling good again. And it's just back and forth. Now, all relationships have ebbs and flows, have dry periods, have ups and downs. But those ups and downs should be kind of stable, like a heart rate. Beep, beep, beep. Not rhythmic necessarily, but just there's not this peak and this valley. But if it's like trying to ski in the Rocky Mountains or something and you're going up and down mountains, that is not the sign of a healthy relationship. That is a sign that you're trauma bonded with somebody. So key points about trauma bonding: the person sends mixed signals. The abuser is sometimes kind and sometimes mean, and that creates confusion for the survivor or the victim, and it does cause trauma. That's why it's called a trauma bond. And this keeps the victim hoping for more good times. You have this hope, well, maybe they're changing. Maybe things are going to get better, especially if they'll go long periods of time and behave, so to speak. And then you think they've changed, and then all of a sudden the monster comes back out, and you're like, where did that come from? And so they have this sort of Jekyll and Hyde thing going on. And then power differences is another one. The abuser has control over the victim in a trauma bond, making the victim feel dependent on the abuser for emotional or physical needs. And then lastly, the abuser often keeps the victim away from friends and family, making it harder for the victim to leave. It also makes it harder for friends and family to note to their loved one that what's happening to them is not right and it's not healthy, because that increases the chances that they'll have other close relationships that are healthier and they won't depend on the abuser as much. And it also means that they're less likely to leave the relationship because they don't have those positive bonds in their life. So what is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort felt when someone has conflicting thoughts or beliefs. People try to reduce their discomfort by changing their thoughts or behaviors. So cognitive dissonance is like, on one hand, you feel this way, you want things to be this way, you believe maybe they are this way, but then underneath there's this current. It's almost unconscious, but it'll come to the surface at times where you know something's not right and something's wrong and something's off, and those are the red flags. And so that cognitive dissonance, as things get worse in a relationship, become more and more pronounced to the point that you get to a point where you can't ignore it anymore or deny it. But somebody will actually try to use denial and disassociation to push it down, and that's very unhealthy. So justifying. is another step of cognitive dissonance, part of it. To ease the discomfort, the victim might justify the abuser's behavior, a form of denial, right? They only hurt me because they love me, or minimize the abuse. It's not that bad. So denial is the other part. And so here in cognitive dissonance, that's a coping mechanism to help you not have to deal with the pain of that cognitive dissonance of knowing something is wrong. And the victim or survivor might deny the severity of the abuse to keep believing the relationship is worth it or that they can't do better. So that's cognitive dissonance. How do trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance connect? Why am I talking about these two things together? I'm not just choosing two random concepts and smushing them together. Cognitive dissonance is what creates trauma bonds and maintains them. So trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance are closely linked. For one, strong attachment is involved, and this is not healthy attachment. Trauma bonding creates an emotional connection to the abuser, making it hard for the victim to see the relationship clearly. Number two, another part of how they're connected is reinforcing confusion. This is a really important one to note. So if you're in a relationship like this, you can be aware of it and protect yourself. The cycle of abuse and kindness strengthens cognitive dissonance because you've got some of both, right? And so that's in your mind and you're aware of both and they're existing at the same time, both and. So good moments create hope and reasons to stay, while bad moments create discomfort and the victim tries to explain it away. Dependence is another part of cognitive dissonance's connection to trauma bonding. The power imbalance and isolation make the victim more dependent on the abuser, increasing the discomfort when thinking about leaving. And that's exactly what the abuser wants. That's what they want, so they can control you. Manipulation. Abusers use cognitive dissonance by switching between cruelty and kindness, keeping the victim off balance and more likely to stay. So trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance together create a strong psychological trap that keeps people in abusive relationships. That's why we're talking about this, so you can be aware of it, so you can protect yourself, so you can prevent situations like this. And if you're in a situation like this, it's not your fault. Don't blame yourself. But you can become aware of it and start to set boundaries and protect yourself, and if need be, get away and end the relationship. So understanding this connection is important for helping victims and survivors, as it shows the complexity of leaving an abusive situation and the need for support that addresses both emotional bonds and conflicting thoughts. So that's a little bit about the basics of trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance. Let's go a little more in depth now. When it comes to cognitive dissonance, what is the definition, the signs, examples, causes, impacts, and solutions. So I've got 4 articles here that I'm using for this talk today. And the first one is Very Well Mind. And this is Very Well Mind. And this is cognitive dissonance and the discomfort of holding conflicting beliefs. Cognitive dissonance and the discomfort of holding conflicting beliefs. And this is written by Kendra Cherry, and I've used a lot of her articles before. I do like Very Well Mind a lot. So cognitive dissonance is, it says in this article, the mental discomfort that results from holding to cognitive beliefs, values, or attitudes. People tend to seek consistency in their attitudes and perceptions, so this conflict causes unpleasant feelings of unease or discomfort. So that inconsistency, people will try to avoid it, to avoid that discomfort and push it down and deny it. They try to relieve the tension in different ways, such as rejecting, explaining away, or avoiding new information. Signs of cognitive dissonance are feeling uncomfortable before doing something or making a decision, like that feeling where you know something's not right, or you shouldn't do something, or you should do something you're not doing. Trying to justify or rationalize a decision you've made or action you've taken. Feeling embarrassed or ashamed about something you've done and trying to hide your actions from other people, and experiencing guilt or regret about something you've done in the past, and doing things because of social pressure, for example, FOMO, fear of missing out. I actually have a podcast episode on FOMO because I think it's that powerful, even if it wasn't something you wanted to do. Examples of cognitive dissonance, this will help clarify it in more of a real-life situation. You want to be healthy, but you don't exercise regularly or eat a nutritious diet, and you feel guilty as a result. You know that smoking or drinking too much is harmful for your health, but you do it anyway. You rationalize this action by pointing to your high stress levels. So these are more like not in a relationship, but just cognitive dissonance in more general ways. You'd like to build up your savings, but tend to spend extra cash as soon as you get it. You regret the decision later, such as when facing an unexpected expense that you don't have the money to cover. So it just goes on. You get the idea. Causes of cognitive dissonance are forced compliance. Sometimes you might find yourself engaged in behaviors that are opposed to your own beliefs due to external expectations at work, school, or a social situation. Or it could be the pressure from the abuser. I'm adding this part. That's me adding that. That you're doing things you don't want to do because you're scared to speak up. And that's not your fault. But you do need to learn to set those boundaries as well, or get away, depending on the severity of the situation. Another type of cause of cognitive dissonance is new information. Sometimes learning new information can lead to feelings of cognitive dissonance. For example, if you engage in a behavior that you later learn is harmful, it can lead to feelings of discomfort. Decisions. People make decisions, both large and small, on a daily basis. So when faced with two similar choices, we are often left with feelings of dissonance because both options are equally appealing. And then once you've made the decision, you may still feel some regret. So that FOMO thing. FOMO is often caused by cognitive dissonance. So influences of cognitive dissonance might be the importance attached to the belief and the number of dissonant beliefs. So cognitive dissonance isn't always two beliefs. Sometimes it can be more than two, and it can get a little complicated. Cognitive dissonance can fill you with anxiety, embarrassment, regret, sadness, shame, and stress. Now, every time you feel those feelings, that doesn't mean you have cognitive dissonance, but it might be a good indication that you do. Impacts of cognitive dissonance, still in the Very Well Mind article, adopting beliefs or ideas to help justify or explain away the conflict. So pretending to be somebody or something you're not to try to avoid that discomfort. Hiding beliefs or behaviors from other people. So pretending to be somebody you're not in order to feel some relief. We've all done that, and we're all human, and we're all guilty of that. But it does happen more in a relationship where there's abuse going on, and maybe the person who's the abuser is ashamed of their behavior, but they don't know how to stop. No excuse. That is not an excuse. Or the person in the relationship that's the survivor doesn't know how to get out, and they try to pretend like everything's okay around other people because they're ashamed of how they're being treated. Totally not that person's fault, okay? There are reasons that people stay in relationships like that, and they're complicated, and we will never condemn somebody like that on the channel. I don't listen to the stuff, why didn't you speak up sooner? Why didn't you get out sooner? It's not always that complicated. For example, there are people that I care about, and I know that they're in a very, very, very bad marriage, and they have children that have extremely serious medical conditions that are life-threatening, and they have health conditions that are debilitating, and they don't have the income or a way to get out. They don't have anywhere to go. And while it would be ideal that they could get out of that situation, it's very, very complicated. So I'm not condemning anybody for staying, but I'm also not condoning somebody to stay. I'm simply saying that there are valid reasons why somebody might be in that situation and not be able to leave immediately. So the other one with cognitive dissonance is only seeking out information that confirms existing beliefs. Cognitive bias, confirmation bias. So dealing with cognitive dissonance, you need to add more beliefs to outweigh your dissonant beliefs, reduce the importance of the conflicting belief, and change your beliefs. Easier said than done, right? So this article goes on, but this is a really good article that gives you a good overview of cognitive dissonance. And I wanted to just kind of go more in depth with it so you can understand how it operates in your real life. And then we'll connect these a little bit more. So trauma bonding, a little bit more here. So like I was talking about a minute ago, it's not always easy to leave a relationship like this. It's not always easy to even see. Because sometimes they're borderline, right? I'm familiar with that experience, believe me. Some cognitive dissonance examples. This is in an article called Confusion to Clarity. I love this website, Confusion to Clarity. And it's a Christian website. And I'm trying to remember the name of the lady that runs it. And she writes the articles, I think. I don't see a name here, but it is Confusion to Clarity. And this one is on cognitive dissonance. And some of the things that somebody might say in a relationship like this is, while you're being abused, it can show in thoughts like, he's a nice guy who means well. Why is he acting that way? Is it me or is it him? I can guarantee you it's him or her. This isn't just something that happens to women. It happens to men too. It happens to people in all kinds of relationships. Why is he acting that way? Is it me or is it him? He's so nice. Why did I doubt him? Oh no, what if he's really an abuser? I must be wrong about that. Maybe I should try again. So there's rationalization involved. And cognitive dissonance happens because of the merry-go-round effect of psychological abuse that leaves your head spinning in confusion and its effects on our brain, the article says. There's this Jekyll and Hyde thing, like I said. And the article just goes on to talk about how psychological abuse creates a dual reality. Gaslighting, which is making you doubt your own reality, causes us to doubt our own thoughts, perceptions, memories, and reality and believe theirs, the other person's. They tell us, this happens to a lot of kids when they're growing up. No, you weren't abused. Well, if you have psychological problems, then that's you. You were born that way. There's something wrong with you. They're basically telling you you were born deficient and there's nothing wrong with how I treated you. BS. If you have psychological problems, 9 times out of 10, something happened to you that was not right. But he tells us that our unreasonableness is causing problems, so we blame ourselves when it's actually him. So what happens is that you're mistreated, and then when you respond to it as any human being would and should, then they'll say you're overreacting and pretend like nothing ever happened or downplay how they treated you. And that's gaslighting, and it just messes with your head so bad because we're trusting this person who claims to love us, but they're undermining us horribly in covert or secret ways. It's very insidious. And so trauma bonding, one of the hallmarks, it says, of both cognitive dissonance and trauma bonding is intrusive thoughts. You've probably heard of highway hypnosis. That occurs when you're so concentrated on driving, you get sleepy while driving, and all of a sudden you realize you're almost at your destination. Highway hypnosis is kind of a trance state. And there are other things that put us in a trance state, like being fatigued or even our blood sugar levels. But that happens all the time. Abusive relationships are exhausting when you're worn down, fatigued, and confused. So you're close to a trance state and more suggestible to what is said to you because you're already worn down. So it kind of takes you out of consciousness a bit and puts you in this sort of dissonance of being in denial and being in disassociation. You hear the base word is the same. Dissonance, disassociation. Their base words are common for a reason. So that's a little bit more about how that has an effect on your mind. So what is trauma bonding? What are its stages? Knowing a little bit more about the stages of trauma bonding can be helpful. There's an article here by Sandstone Care. Sandstone Care. It's a therapy site, I guess. And it goes over the stages of trauma bonding. And I think there's actually a video here. It's written by Deborah Quinn, and it's reviewed by Sarah Fletcher. And it's talking about what is trauma bonding. And I'm not going to go over all that again here. But these articles, as always, I will put all of them in the show notes, just like I will all of the information I talked about at the beginning of the podcast if you want to subscribe to anything or help out. But there are 7 stages of trauma bonding according to Sandstone Care and the author of this article. The first one is love bombing, and there's actually an infographic here. So when you meet somebody, it could be a relationship and a romantic partner with a romantic partner, but it could be a friendship. It could be a coworker. It could be a church. Religious communities can do this too. It can happen to groups of people. Keep that in mind too. When people join cults, I'm not calling all religious groups a cult, but I am talking about actual cults. All of the same psychological effects happen in a cult situation. So if you see a lot of this happening at a church, you need to either get out, call it out, and if there's somebody you care about there, let them know what you see. You'll probably be told that you're sowing discord, disunity, that you're trying to cause division. But if there's genuine abuse going on, calling it out is the only right thing to do. And you are not sowing division. You are calling out something that is causing harm to yourself and other people. And you are doing the right thing. 7 stages of trauma bonding, though. The first one is love bonding. Love bombing. Excessive flattery and praise to the partner. That's where it's like, You've been dating somebody 2 weeks and somehow they've convinced you to marry them. They do that on purpose because they try to get you in so quick that once you realize how they are, it's too late. And it's harder to get out because that bond has been formed. And then the second part of trauma bonding is trust and dependency. That's the next part that happens. They do anything to gain your trust and dependence. That's where isolation comes in, right? Number 3, criticism. Then you start seeing little yellow flags. It might just be minor things at first that happens in any relationship, but then they start happening too much and they start turning into orange flags and red flags. Blames and criticizes the other person to make them feel bad about themselves. And then the next part is manipulate the partner or the other person into thinking, I am the crazy one. That's gaslighting. That's the gaslighting I was talking about a minute ago. Number 5, addiction. That's where the trauma bond is set. The partner or the other person gets emotionally addicted to the positive reinforcement that comes after the abuse. It's a cycle. It literally cycles like a circle. It comes and goes. It comes and goes. And it can happen. It's not necessarily a perfect rhythm, but it does happen like that. Loss of self. That person doesn't want you to have a strong sense of self. They don't want you to have your own life and your own identity. And they may even try to give you freedom in one area and then control you in another. So it can be very subtle. You have to be really careful with this. But the partner loses their sense of self. So the victim or the survivor loses their sense of self. And number 7, resignation and submission. This is where they hook you and reel you in completely. And that is the partner or the other person gives in to avoid conflict and please the abuser. So trauma bond cycle, the 7 stages it says, they cycle include, well, we've already gone over those, but it's important for victims to understand each stage to break free from the cycle and heal from the trauma inflicted on them throughout the relationship. And then it just goes into more detail about how each of those stages work. I'm not going to read all of those, but we've already talked about some of the signs and whether it's love or if it's a trauma bond. Trauma bond, some people will say there's real love, but it's messed up. I'm sorry, but I don't believe that's real love. Real love, the Bible tells us what love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It is not a seeker of self. You get the idea. And those things are all just the opposite. So how can you call that love? It's not love. And sometimes, nobody deserves what they get when they're abused or when they're mistreated. But if somebody's in denial, sometimes a cold water to the face is what it takes to wake that person up. And it's a shock and it's painful and it's difficult, but that's what is needed because love tells the truth. Love is kind. Love is patient. Love is not perfect. That doesn't mean nobody ever loses their temper or gets impatient or there's some drama involved, but that should be happening a lot less than the other things. And there shouldn't be this cycle of extremes. That's where you know there's a trauma bond and there's abuse going on. And so it gives examples of trauma bonding, this article, and then it talks about how to break free from a trauma bond. And so that's the next part that I want to talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So when you try to get out of a situation like that, just like an addiction of any kind, you can have withdrawal symptoms and it can be very difficult to overcome a trauma bond, but it can be done. So Sandstone Care talks about the physical withdrawal symptoms of trauma bonds, and one of those is emotional cravings, another one is anxiety, and another one is flashbacks of what that person did to you. How do you detox from it? Just like any other addiction, you focus on the present, you create space and boundaries, you find support. When you have a weak moment and you want to call that person or they're texting you and you want to text back, you need to reach out to support and get somebody to help you to stay strong. You don't have to do this alone. Know that there are resources that can help you. Practice self-care, develop healthy relationships, and be kind to yourself. So those are some of the ways that you can work towards breaking a trauma bond. How to heal from a trauma bond: you need to create a safety plan. You need to work on stress management techniques and ways to process trauma. And you need to work together with a therapist or a coach to rebuild self-esteem and practice new life skills. So those are some of the ways that you can heal from it. But I wanted to go into more detail about how to break free from a trauma bond. How do you heal that cognitive dissonance? How do you use the cognitive dissonance to actually... Cognitive dissonance isn't a bad thing because your body and your mind are telling you, hey, something's wrong here. Something is not right. You need to trust that and you need to listen to it. There might be times where you feel like something's not right and you could be wrong. That is possible. I'm not saying every time you have that instinct something's wrong, because I've actually thought somebody was a bad person and then I found out that they weren't and I read them wrong. We're not perfect, right? So keep your mind open, but don't let yourself be deceived. Don't let yourself be tricked. That's also something to be careful about as well. So ways to break free from a trauma bond. There's an article in Psychology Today, and this is by John Kim, and he writes how to break free from a trauma bond. So he says healing from a trauma bond can be a challenging process, but it is possible. Some things you can do are recognize the trauma bond. The first step is to recognize and acknowledge that you are in a trauma bond and it's not healthy or sustainable. So it's coming to the light, bringing the truth to the light, and helping you to understand the cycle. This is why I'm doing this video. So if you're in a situation like this, or you're starting to get into one, you can back the hell up and get out. Acknowledge the connection you feel with the person is rooted in a trauma bond and is not healthy or sustainable. That's the first that's the first step you need to take. By recognizing and understanding trauma bonds, you can work with breaking free from unhealthy patterns and create healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Number 2, seek support. One effective approach to healing from a trauma bond is seeking support from a therapist or counselor, or maybe a minister. But don't let a minister gaslight you about the sacrament of marriage and you can't break your marriage bond and all of that. If you're being abused and it's messing you up, I'm not talking about a situation that's not perfect. I'm not saying people should not fight for their marriages. Absolutely they should. But if there's abuse going on and all of these signs are there, you need to get out. And if somebody tells you otherwise, you need to find somebody else to get support from. But somebody who's safe can provide a way for you to explore your experiences, emotions, and patterns. And you can start getting clarity. Just like that article, you go from confusion to clarity. And it helps you to understand why you're attracted to that person. It helps you to deconstruct the trauma bond and helps you to start seeing the cognitive dissonance, the contradictory beliefs. If you break those down and you understand them, you'll start to separate the truth from the deception. I'll say it again. If you start to break down your cognitive dissonance and deconstruct it, you'll start to see the difference between the truth and the deception. And the Bible talks all over the place about truth and deception and all of that. And that's exactly what it is. It's wolves in sheep's clothing. They are very tricky. You don't see them. You think you're going to see some wolf with like a fleece on it and he's tiptoeing through the woods like some, Looney Tunes cartoon, but it's not like that. It's tricky. It really is. The next one, step 3, is set boundaries. Establish clear boundaries with the person you're trauma bonded with. This may involve limiting or cutting contact, especially if the relationship is toxic or abusive. Boundaries are essential for your well-being and can help create space for healing. Number 4, self-reflect. Self-reflection is important to healing. Take the time to understand the patterns and narratives that have shaped your beliefs about yourself and your relationships. Reflect on the impact these beliefs have had on your past and current relationships. That helps you to rewrite your narrative and create healthier dynamics. Number 5, it says practice self-care. Self-care and self-compassion are crucial during the healing process. Engage in activities that bring you joy, prioritize your well-being, and surround yourself with supportive, understanding people. It helps you to start reconnecting with God, reconnecting with yourself, because an abuser who puts you in a situation like this does not want you to have a strong sense of self. And that's exactly what you need to have. And in my opinion, that's what I believe God wants us to have as well, because that's how we have healthy relationships. That's how we love other people. And that's how we have a healthy relationship with God, where we're not projecting. So remember that healing takes time and patience. Be gentle with yourself as you navigate the journey. Number 6, process your emotions. Allow yourself to feel and process the emotions that arise during the journey. It's normal to experience a range of emotions. Journaling, talking to a trusted friend, and creative outlets, as well as meditation, are ways that you can work on your healing process. So if you still feel like you miss that person and you want to pick up the phone and call them and you have this withdrawal, that's normal. Don't shame yourself for that. That's exactly part of the process that led to the trauma bonding, and that's not your fault. Acknowledge the feeling, but don't give in to it. There's nothing wrong with you if you're still feeling feelings for that person. That's totally normal. You're bonded with that person. But don't give in to them. Don't let it make you pick up the phone. Don't let it make you text that person or let them back in your life. That's when you need to seek support and find alternatives, outlets for that. Number 7, challenge negative beliefs. Identify and challenge negative beliefs or narratives that may be keeping you attached to the trauma bond. For example, that it was your fault, that you did all these things to cause the relationship to have the issues that it did, and so on. Now, taking stock in our part in something is different than taking the blame for something when you're in an abusive relationship. That's victim blaming. So challenging that brainwashing is really important, and being like, no, and remember who you are in Christ and who you are in God, because you are not worthless. It is not your fault, and you didn't do anything wrong if you got abused. You didn't cause that. You did not cause that. Number 8, focus on personal growth. Use that as an opportunity to focus on your personal growth and self-discovery. Explore your interests, set goals, and invest in activities that help you build a strong sense of self. And so gaining independence, breaking free of the trauma bond, those are some of the steps that Psychology Today, John Kim, talks about in how to break free from a trauma bond. Has been, what does the trauma bond have to do with cognitive dissonance? We've talked a little bit about what cognitive dissonance is. We've talked about what trauma bonding is and what are its stages. We've talked about the connection between trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance, and how to free yourself from a trauma bond and move from clarity to confusion. Thank you for following me on this journey. If you're in an unhealthy, unsafe, or abusive relationship, I hope that this is giving you some insights that can help you start to identify if this is happening, to start deconstructing it and see the steps of what is happening, to start separating the lies from the truth, and to start coming up with a game plan to get yourself safe and to get yourself in a healthy place and to start breaking that trauma bond so you can be you again. Remember, beloveds, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and God loves you. Have a great day.